I'm an elderly man now, living alone in a modest house. I have children, but they rarely visit. Sometimes, the loneliness creeps in, and my thoughts drift back to my younger days. Among the many memories I carry, there is one I can never forget, no matter how hard I try to push it away. When I was young, I believed my parents were truly my own. They were loving, attentive, and made sure I was always happy. I never had to worry about anything. They ensured I was cared for and that my needs were met. I always felt safe in their presence, convinced that everything in my life was perfect. But that illusion shattered one fateful day. I was 15 years old when I first learned the truth. The memory of that afternoon is still vivid. It was quiet, the kind of calm day that made everything feel ordinary. I was sitting with my mother in the living room, and as I looked up at her, I noticed tears in her eyes. She took a deep breath and, after a long pause, said, "I have something to tell you." At that moment, confusion flooded my mind. I was unsure of what she meant and felt a creeping sense of fear. "What is it, Mother?" I asked, gazing at her with concern. She gently took my hand, but her nervousness was palpable. She looked down, then back at me, and softly said, "We are not your real parents." The words hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't believe it. My heart sank, and my mind spun with questions. My whole world seemed to collapse. For years, I had believed they were my biological parents. I wanted to ask more, but the words just wouldn't come. My mind was too overwhelmed. She explained that I wasn't born to them. They had found me as an infant in an orphanage and took me in, raising me as their own. They loved me as their child, and I had grown up believing that. That revelation turned my world upside down. After that conversation, I couldn't stop thinking about my birth parents. Who were they? Where were they now? Why had they left me? Why didn't they come back for me? A storm of questions swirled in my mind, and I felt lost. I decided then that I needed to find them. I had to uncover the truth about who I really was. The following days were filled with confusion and sadness. I couldn't shake the feeling of being lost, and I began searching for answers. But how could I find my real parents? Where should I begin? My mother's words echoed in my mind as I wondered where to go next. I thought about the orphanage and whether it still existed. I didn't even know where it was, but I decided that I had to find it. I packed a small bag one day and left home, driven by a need for answers. The fear of the unknown tugged at me, but I couldn't stop. I had to know. I spent hours walking, asking people along the way if they knew where the orphanage was. Most had no idea, but some remembered. It turned out the orphanage was on the outskirts of the town. When I finally reached it, the building looked old and quiet. There were no children playing outside. The silence felt heavy. I knocked on the door, and a woman answered. She looked at me with curiosity. "Can I help you?" she asked. I explained my search, telling her I was looking for information about my biological parents. She listened carefully, but after a long silence she said, "I think I remember you. You were just a baby when they brought you here. But I don't know what happened to them. They left in a hurry, and there was nothing left behind." I felt a deep sense of disappointment. I had hoped for more answers, but the woman had little information to offer. She told me that my parents had left quickly, and there was no trace of where they went. My journey didn't end there, though. Despite the setback, I refused to give up. I visited more places, spoke to more people, and even traveled to different towns. I hoped that someone, somewhere, could give me a clue. It felt like an endless search, but I couldn't stop. I had to know the truth. After many weeks of searching, I finally encountered a man who claimed to have known my real parents. He told me that they had been kind, though poor, and that they loved me deeply. They had been forced to leave me at the orphanage because they could no longer care for me. The man's words brought some comfort, but I still had many unanswered questions. Where were they now? Why did they leave me? I couldn't shake the ache in my chest. My search seemed futile, and I felt the weight of uncertainty. I didn't give up, though. I kept searching for answers. I visited more towns, asking anyone who might have known something, but no one had any further information. It felt like I was chasing a memory, a ghost of the past. One day, as I sat by the side of the road, exhausted and disheartened, an old woman approached me. She noticed the sadness in my eyes and asked, "Are you all right, young man?" I looked up at her, feeling defeated. "I'm looking for my parents," I said. "I don't know where they are, or why they left me." The woman sat down beside me. "I can help you," she said gently. "I knew your parents. I know where they went." My heart raced. Could this be true? Finally, someone who could offer answers. "Please, tell me everything," I urged, my voice trembling with hope. She explained that my parents had come from a small village far from here. They had fallen on hard times and couldn't care for me any longer. Although it broke their hearts, they left me at the orphanage, hoping I would have a better life. She added that my parents had always wanted to come back for me, but something had happened, forcing them to leave the village. After that, no one knew where they went. Her words brought a mix of relief and heartache. I finally had some closure, but I still felt a void. I had learned that my parents loved me, but the questions of why they left and where they went would haunt me forever. After all this time, I finally understood that my parents had never forgotten me. They had always loved me, and they had tried to return for me, but life had been unforgiving. I didn't know what to do with this new knowledge. It was more than I had ever hoped for, yet it still left so many questions unanswered. Where were they now? Could I ever find them? Despite the uncertainty, I couldn't stop searching. I had to find my parents, no matter what. The hope I had been desperately searching for was now within my grasp, and I wasn't about to let it slip away. Every day, I continued my search. I walked through new towns and villages, my legs aching and feet sore, but my heart kept me moving forward. I had learned that my parents loved me and had never wanted to leave me. One afternoon, I reached a small, quiet village I had never seen before. The homes were old but well-maintained, and the peaceful atmosphere seemed to embrace me. I decided to rest in a local cafe and ask for directions, though I didn't hold much hope. At a table by the window sat an old man, who smiled at me as I entered. "Are you new here?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes. I'm searching for my parents. They came from a small village. I don't know where they went. Can you help me?" The moment I spoke, the man's expression changed. "You're looking for your parents?" he asked softly. "What are their names?" I told him what little I knew, the names of the places where I had grown up, and a few fragments of their lives. The man thought for a moment before his eyes lit up. "I remember them," he said. "Your mother and father were good people. I knew them well." My heart raced. Could it really be true? This man knew my parents. I asked him to tell me more. He spoke of my parents with warmth, saying they had once lived in a small house at the edge of the village. They had worked hard and were always kind to everyone. However, when life became too difficult, they were forced to leave. They didn't have enough money to care for me, and though it broke their hearts, they made the painful decision to let me go. They loved you very much, the man said. They talked about you all the time. His words filled me with a bittersweet sense of happiness. I had always hoped my parents loved me, but hearing how difficult their lives had been only added to the ache in my chest. They didn't deserve such hardship. He gave me directions to where they had lived, not far from where we were. A new energy stirred within me. I was finally getting closer to the truth. I thanked the man and left the cafe, walking briskly toward the place where my parents had once lived. The directions took me through narrow streets, past small homes, until I reached the edge of the village. There, I found an old, quiet house. It seemed empty, but there was something about it that felt familiar. I stood for a moment, taking it all in. I didn't know what I would find inside, but I was ready to face whatever came next. I knocked on the door, and after a long pause, it slowly opened. A woman stood in the doorway. She was older than I remembered, but there was something in her face that felt familiar. "Can I help you?" she asked softly, her eyes filled with kindness. I didn't know what to say. I had been searching for so long, and now I was standing before her. My heart pounded in my chest. Are you my mother?" I asked, my voice trembling. The woman's eyes widened in surprise. She stared at me for a long time before a gentle smile appeared on her face. "Yes," she said softly, "I am your mother." Tears filled my eyes. After all these years, I had found her. She stepped forward and embraced me tightly. I couldn't believe it. All the years of wondering, searching, and hoping had led me here, to her. "Why did you leave me?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. Her eyes filled with sadness. "We had no choice," she said softly. "Life was very hard, and we couldn't care for you anymore. But we never stopped thinking about you. Every day, we hoped you would be okay." In that moment, I felt a mix of emotions. I was happy to have found her, but the pain of all we had suffered was still there. Life had been cruel to us, and I didn't understand why. Yet, in her arms, those emotions seemed to fade. I realized that despite everything, she had never stopped loving me. I stayed with her for hours, talking and sharing stories. She told me everything that had happened after I was taken away. She explained how hard it had been for her to let go, but how she had always held on to the hope of finding me one day. Eventually, it was time to leave. I had found my mother, but the life I had shared with the family who raised me was still a part of me. As I walked away from the house, I realized I faced a difficult decision. I had found the truth, but I still didn't know where I truly belonged. I spent many days reflecting on everything. I loved my real mother, but I also missed the family who had raised me. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion. Should I stay with my mother, or return to the family who had always cared for me? One morning, I decided to visit the family who had raised me. I walked back to their house, a place that was still familiar, though it seemed so far removed from my new reality. They were sitting outside, enjoying the sunshine, and they looked up in surprise when they saw me. "Where have you been?" the old man asked. "I found my real mother," I said quietly. The woman's expression shifted, and I could see the sadness in her eyes. She didn't speak, just sat there, looking at me with an understanding that pierced my heart. I sat beside them, unsure of what to say next. My heart felt heavy with the choice I had to make. "You want to go back to her, don't you?" the old man asked gently. I looked at both of them. They had given me a good life. They had loved me, and they had always been there for me. But now, I had found my mother. "I don't know what to do," I whispered. "I love you both. You've always been there for me." The old man smiled gently. "We know, son. We always knew you might want to find your real family one day. But we also know that love isn't about blood. It's about care and kindness. I sat in silence, reflecting on his words. It hurt, but I knew he was right. The family who had raised me had loved me with all their hearts, and that love was real. After a while, I stood up and turned to them. "I think I will stay with you," I said softly. "You are my family. You gave me love when I needed it the most." The old man stood and hugged me. "We're glad to hear that," he said quietly. And so, I stayed. Over time, I came to understand the true meaning of family. It's not about who you are born to, but the love and care you share with those around you. In the end, that's all that matters. I had found the truth, and I had found my place in the world.